This video is going to be the third episode of the 1-year F4i review, and today we're going to talk about why I like Cox so much. But in all seriousness, we're going to talk about the Cox cage, Subcage, and the rear sets today. So I'm going to start with the rear sets because there's not too much to say about them. I really like these SS Moto rear sets. I don't really have any complaints about them. These pegs are super grippy on my boots. On this side, the heel guard is in the same exact spot. I kept it straight. The one thing that did happen on the left side here with the shifter is that the nut, or whatever hardware you want to call where this bolt goes in, that stripped out last year, and I could never get this bolt to stay torqued well, so that bolt fell out a couple times actually. And it's not too big of a deal for the lot because I was able to just zip tie the shift lever to the rear set, and then I could keep riding and do everything in first gear that I needed to. But if you're doing street stuff, that's something to worry about and pay attention to a little bit. Essentially, the best practice is to put some blue Loctite on there. I got a new piece of hardware, put the blue Loctite in, tightened it, and ever since last year it's been perfectly fine. Like I said in the install video for the rear sets, you don't want to over tighten these bolts because you'll lose the ability for the shift lever or the brake lever to rotate. So you want to get it as tight as possible, but where it's still able to freely rotate. You can kind of see how much movement is here on that lever, but it's secure, but there's still a little free play. So if that's something you notice, that's perfectly fine. It's not going to be 100% no free play. Like, you want a little bit of movement there. Looking at the shift lever from up here, I mean, you can see how much it fluctuates, but this thing is secure. It's not going anywhere. It shifts perfectly fine. That piece of hardware, it's that shaft that the shift lever slides onto, that's what stripped out the threads in there. I did have the foot pegs loosen up. I think it was just the Delrin or whatever they use on the edges here. You know, with stunt riding, since you're doing a lot more aggressive riding and, you know, high RPM, lots of drops, like, it's always a good thing to check your bolts. Things are going to loosen more frequently. You can kind of see I like to put some marine grease on the shaft there too. You can see the buildup there, and that kind of keeps everything from seizing up. I think I just have the one washer there now. I think in the install video I used more of the OEM hardware, but this is what worked for me here. You can see how straight the heel guard is on this side. I'll show you on the other side. I kind of moved it out of the way a little more because my boot gets stuck on it using the foot brake. So here's the right side. Same thing, don't over tighten this bolt, otherwise your foot brake will kind of get stuck. It won't return all the way. There's still the same amount of play on this lever like there is on the shift lever side. You can kind of see how I bent in this heel guard here because the heel of my boot would end up getting stuck in one of these gaps, and I didn't like the fact that it was doing that. I later just took it and bent it that way. A big thing for me, which I'll probably end up adding more, is the angle of this foot brake lever. I angled it down so my foot wasn't as stressed, kind of keeping it up so it wasn't constantly resting on the foot brake. The more I do foot brake tricks, I'll probably adjust this and give me some more angle down the road to make it a little more comfortable with certain stuff. In terms of foot brake, this is how everything's set up here. The reservoir for the foot brakes in the OEM fashion. I've got the line running to here, and then the foot brake line is there and kind of does a little loop and comes down through those OEM guides right to the foot brake caliper there. When you're bleeding this foot brake for the first time, if you're doing new lines, you want to make sure the caliper ends up being higher than the master cylinder and the reservoir, so put it like up here. All the air that's in the new lines, you need it to come out, and air rises, so you need the bleeder at the highest point. There's no bleeder on this master cylinder like there is on like your Brembo master cylinders up at the lever. So having the caliper at the highest point will get all that extra air out. So you'll have to, you know, initially put it up higher And then when you bleed after that, you know, when you're just flushing fresh fluid in place, I don't make any changes. I just do it where it is, because essentially there should be no air in that system already. It's closed. And all you're doing is flushing new fluid in. So I've been running the Cox Pro Series mini cage this whole time. Initially, when I was doing this F4i build, I wasn't sure if I wanted to run the OG cage with the crossbar or this Pro Series cage. I thought maybe that since I'm doing lot work that this Pro Series wouldn't protect the bike enough, like, you know, because it didn't have that extra cross member, it couldn't take the same beating. But I've dropped this bike hundreds of times over the last year, and you know, the only thing that's been worn down are the pucks on each side, and you know, everything else has been protected and it's done the job that it should. So if you're in the market for a Cox cage and you're unsure, I'd say, you know, if you're running naked, you gotta go with the Pro Series cage. If you're running full fairing, I think you can get away with either. I think the Pro Series looks better. It's sleeker. But if you have full fairings on, you can get away with that extra cross member on the OG cage, and it looks pretty good like that. But definitely if you're naked, you gotta go Pro Series. So for the torque specs, I run 29 foot-pounds for the front and the center motor mount, which is what the manual says. And then for the all-thread, I really don't torque it down. I just really tighten down those nuts on each side as tight as I can, and basically make sure that the all-thread's even, so the amount of exposed threads on each side kind of are equivalent. So I'll show you right now what that looks like. On this side I have like that many threads, and then I pretty much try and match it on that side as well, so it's pretty even. I was never able to hit the correct torque on that all thread nut, so I just make sure they're snug and they're even. Obviously I run some HT Moto here to protect the frame from the cage, so you're not metal on metal. It crushes that pretty good, so I replace that once a year. And this is how I have the speedometer mounted. I like having it this way because I can look down while I'm riding and just check everything that I need to, idle, temps, all that, and it's nice and flat. And what I did was I have the one zip tie around the center here, and then I zip tied that zip tie to the frame, and that keeps it from rotating kind of down and falling into the cage. Sometimes if you take a big slam, this speedometer would kind of just like rotate and fall down into the cage, and I have to pick it up. And then I also have a little bit of like double-sided Velcro on the cage and on the back of the Speedo, just as another, I think in 2 points here, just, you know, to keep it secure. So this way I don't have to worry about it ever falling down and having to readjust it. And then recently I made some custom spacers for the cage. Last year you saw in the install video that I kind of came up with my own combination of assorted spacers, which worked fine. Like, I had no issues with it, but I'd rather just have one solid piece of aluminum in between there. So I ordered just like a 5-inch tube of 6061 aluminum on McMaster-Carr, and then I cut down that cylinder to what I needed for each spacer. So everything's been replaced on each side with one solid piece of aluminum. See here, so there's no specialty combo of spacers, and that's mainly just for my peace of mind, just to have one nice single piece as a spacer there and not some giant combination. I don't know if I ever showed in the original install, but I do have a washer on the back side there, and then the nut, just so I can get onto the threads of that bolt. I think I may have shown that, but I also have some grip tape here, and that'll come in handy for unicycle stuff in the future. That's how that looks. And you know, we're all nice and square still. So, but I really like this cage. It's done a really good job for me. When installing the cage, some good tips are to kind of keep everything loose before you tighten stuff down. Start with your center motor mount bolt, then slide the front bolt through, and then get that all thread in the back to sneak through. I had to get a second left side cage because the first one, the fitment was off, which you know, every bike's gonna be a little different. I could have made it work. Like, I opened up the hole in the back there on that plate, and I was able to get the all thread through, but you know, Cox helped me out and sent me a new one, and that's what I'm running here, and it had a lot better fitment, so you know, I can't complain about that. They took care of me very well. The customer service is great. This is the Subcage. I don't have any complaints with the Subcage. I really like the Euro style. It is a little bit weird for like double back peg. It kind of feels a little bit weird, but you get used to it. But for like staggered circles and Ralph Louis, having this angle on those pegs really locks you in. So if you're doing a lot more circle stuff, I'd recommend the Euro style. If you're going to be doing a lot of straight line street riding, I'd probably stick with the regular flat peg. I did notice that sometimes my rear tire would hit the bottom of it. I don't know if you can kind of see some of those bigger marks. Even though I have the saggy ass fix, maybe I need to, you know, tighten up the suspension in the rear a little bit, make it a little stiffer. So underneath the seat here, obviously we have the Mike Jensen mod. I added Velcro, double-sided Velcro tape onto the wood and the seat to keep it from rotating, and then it's just 3 zip ties around the cross member of that subframe through the wood. And these electrical components are pretty much just double-sided taped to the battery tray. As you can see, it kind of melts away due to the heat here and there, so I tend to have to replace those pieces of tape here and there. That's kind of how everything else is stuffed in right here. It does not hit the seat at all, and there's plenty of clearance here. And for the battery, the only thing that I did differently was I added these star washers on both posts to keep the connectors from coming off, because if you remember in the beginning of the season, I had a couple times where, maybe it was one big scare where the battery connections were loose and the bike shut off mid-wheelie. So once you put those suckers on, that thing, you pretty much only have to tighten it once in the beginning of the season really well, and it's not going anywhere. The one thing on the switch styles panel was my power to the panel cable here, the whatever spade connector, whatever you want to call it, that goes onto the battery bolt post there. That thing came loose, and also I lost my, basically it controls the accessory power back there, or on the panel, so I lost my fan. So we just put our own connector on and soldered it and crimped it down so it's much more permanent now. And that was the one other big thing that happened electrical wise. Obviously the rectifier runs outside and then inside and down up in there, but that's everything underneath the seat. This is kind of how the battery tray is cut. Got the 1 o'clock plate mounted through the subframe and then through the battery tray and the subframe as well. And all the excess has been kind of cut flush for the most part, so it kind of lines up with the subframe. But that's how it's sitting in the back here. That's nice and not exposed for the most part on either side there. I think I messed up this cut. I think I could have shaved more, and that was annoying me, but I was too lazy to break out the Dremel again. But that's the battery tray there. Stuff looks on this side too. So I'm a big fan of this F4i seat by Bella Stunt Seats. They took my stock OEM F4i seat and built it up, regripped it. You know, this foothold has a nice firm build up, so I have good solid support there when my foot's in it. And same thing with this part of the seat for like seat standers. And this material is super grippy too. I feel like I'm locked in when I'm doing sit downs. I'm not going anywhere, so I'm a big fan of this seat. If you're looking for any sort of stunt seat, Bella Seats is the spot to go to. 1 o'clock plate by Cox. Really not much to say there. I don't have any titanium on it. As you can see, I've scraped it up a couple times. Not trying to hit scrapes, mainly parking the bike or whatever and going back, but does its job, protects the subframe and my seat from getting blown out. You can see where it's lined up there. My Mike Jensen mod, I think I showed, you know, you see the video on how I fixed that. Works perfectly, I have no complaints there. Obviously my seat, I drilled the holes through the bracket and the subframe and locked it in with a screw and a nut. This is how the rectifier is mounted and routed. The wires kind of stick out here and then slide through there and down. So I think that's going to do it for the third episode of the 1 year F4i review. There's not too much to say about the Cox cages and the rear sets. They've worked really well for me, and I'm really happy with the choices that I made with them, and hopefully that gives you a little more insight on kind of what kind of cage you want to go with and subcage, and a couple tricks for the installs there.
Hardest stash in the carpet. Yeah, we trapping out apartments.